Hi guys, welcome back to my show. My name is Priscilla Kuma. If you're new here, welcome to this channel. If you're a health practitioner who is interested in working in USA, this channel will be beneficial to you. I'm also the lead consultant for USRN Pathway Consult, where we help all international nurses who want to work in USA to be able to work in USA by writing NCLEX and getting them to employers. And if you haven't joined the consult yet, what are you waiting for? On this channel as well, we bring other healthcare professionals to come and share their journey, what they have been up to, what they've done, and how somebody else can benefit from this journey. But before then, I would like to observe a minute silence for my very good friend who has been on this channel before. Yes, I'm sure you've seen or heard that we lost a member. It's just a coincidence that we have another person who is in his field. I once interviewed Hilary on this channel. He's a lab technician from Ghana, who's been based in the USA, went back to Ghana, and then unfortunately it was involved in a very tragic accident and he could not make it. So I pray that his family been consoled, and I am grateful for having our paths crossed. And condolences to everybody who once knew him. Hilary, may you rest in peace.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Seriously.
Okay, so let's get back in the cheerful mode and do this business. So I have somebody here, KC. He's going to tell us about himself. He is originally from Nigeria, but he's here in the US with me. And you hear his journey of as a healthcare practitioner, whatever he's been up to, he will be able to tell us. So KC, welcome to my channel.
Okay, thank you so much, Priscilla, for the introduction. Thank you so much for allowing me to feature in your show. It was actually nice actually being here. A little bit about me. My name is Anasoye Emmanuel Casey. I'm a lab scientist and I'm also a doctor. I did my training as a lab scientist back in my country, Nigeria. Before I transitioned or migrated to the Caribbean for my medical journey. Currently working as a research assistant. I'm also applying for residency here in the US to get into the US medical residency. And I've written the clinical lab exam and also I've written the exam for that of the medical doctors. So I think I have an experience when it comes to licensing process and what it takes for someone to practice both here as a lab scientist and also as a doctor. Just like I said, it was nice having you and also being interviewed by you and sharing in your channel.
Thank you very much. That is a detailed introduction. And talking of career switch, so if I got you correctly, you were once a lab technician, or you are still a lab technician, and then you went to medical school to become a medical doctor, and now you are in the US. So it's possible. People have other careers, and like, I want to go into nursing. Can I do it? Yes. You can switch careers anytime, depending on whatever you want to do in this life. So I'm proud of you that you have two careers and you can use one whilst the other one is pending. So let's go back to Nigeria and talk about medical lab in Nigeria. How many years program was it? Was it a diploma? Was it a bachelor's? What is it about? Please.
Okay, so for medical lab science in Nigeria, it's a bachelor's program, though there are other kind of associate programs you can do. But for the most part, what I did was a bachelor's program in medical lab science. Actually, they call it Bachelor of Medical Lab Science. That's you're given a BMLS degree after your training as a medical lab science. Just like I said, there are other programs where you can do something like biochemistry or microbiology and do like a 2 year associate program and you become a clinical lab scientist. But the one I did was a bachelor's program. So after the training, after 5 years of training, you're supposed to do a compulsory 1 year of internship rotating through different sectors or different sections of the lab. And after that, you get what's known as a provisional license to practice in the country where you trained. Basically, for me, it's Nigeria. So, just like most people know, in Nigeria, there is this 1 year structure where you have to serve your home country and you'll be posted to any part of the country to go and serve, this time independently without supervision. You work as a clinical lab scientist, and after that, you get your full registered license to practice as a clinical lab scientist. So that's a bit of my journey. So it takes about 7 years in total for you to be fully registered as a clinical lab scientist back in Nigeria. That's a crazy amount of time. It's a long amount of time, but that is what it takes for you to be fully registered in Nigeria as a clinical lab scientist up up till now.
Wow, 7 years is a long time. And I heard you mention 5 years. So it took 5 years to get that degree, that
Yeah,
bachelor's.
yeah. 5 years of training, 1 year of internship, 1 year of serving your country, then you get your full license.
Okay. So after all that, I believe you worked for a while before you woke up one day and said, no, I think I want to go to medical school. Did you work for a while before?
Okay, that's where the clause is. So I didn't work. So after my youth service, I already during my internship, I decided I don't want to. I want to do something differently. Like I want to venture into medicine because originally my intention was to become a doctor. But the way Nigeria is structured, somehow you have to get a certain amount of jam score for you to get into medicine. So it's very competitive. So for us, I got into medical lab, and to be honest, it exposed me a lot to medicine and to the field where I'm applying right now too. So I just transitioned to Caribbean to do my medical school immediately after my youth service. Immediately I got my license. So I didn't practice. I didn't practice independently as a clinical lab scientist back in Nigeria.
Okay. So let's talk about your medical school life or your medical school days. You said Caribbean. If you're comfortable, you can mention the country. And what were the prerequisites before you got into the medical school? Based on your background, did they waive some courses? Did you start from first year or did they jump you into second, third year? Anything about that? And which country is it? Because it might benefit somebody who wants to study abroad and doesn't know where to go.
Yeah, that's the reason why we're doing this. I actually schooled in Guyana. There are a couple of other Caribbean countries where someone can go for medical education. And I think one of the reasons why people go to the Caribbean for medical school is because their structure is similar to that they have here in the US. So 2 years of your ideally you're supposed to have a bachelor degree in something, let's say biology related or something within the medical field before you'll be allowed to do the 4 years training as a medical student. So 2 years of basic medical science and 2 years of clinicals, going through different rotations in the hospital. So for me, I already have my first degree as a medical lab scientist, so I didn't go on repeating the chemistries and the physics. No, that one was skipped for me. So I went on to start anatomy. I did physiology and anatomy back in Nigeria, but I have to do it more detailed in medical school. And after that, I did my rotations in the Caribbean. But ideally, what most people do is after their training, 2 years of training in the Caribbean, they come to the US because most Caribbean schools have hospitals in the US where the student can do rotations. When I mean rotations, I mean clinical rotations in different hospitals. But if you're limited by resources, let's say financial resources or probably your personal reasons, you can do rotations back there in the Caribbean if they have that provision. Then after that, if you want to still come over here, you have to go through the exams. If you don't want to come, then you want to go back to your home country, there is also option of that. So for me, immediately after my training, I did my board exams, practiced a little bit. There, basically was into academia. Then before I transitioned to the US. Yeah.
Okay, so how many years did the program take you? And were you a cash paying student, like an international student paying fees, or did you go there with a grant, scholarship, or anything? How many years and did you use a grant?
Yeah, so if you have a certain amount of CGPA in your first degree, they will waive about 2,000 USD for you. For me, the initial school fees was around 8,000, but because I measured up to the CGPA for scholarship, so they waived 2,000 for me. So I paid 6,000 for the 4 years of my training. Um, and it was also along the line as you go through the training, you might be opportune to get some scholarship, like from probably if you're doing so fantastically well in your courses or something. But it's not so open to so many international students. Mostly it's for local students.
Okay. So after you spent about how many years over there in school?
I spent 4 years in the Caribbean, 2 years doing basics like anatomy, physiology, biochemistry,
Mhm.
and pathology and pharmacology. Then I did also my 2 years, like basically total 4 years of clinical rotations, rotating through the different sections of the hospital over there, from OBGYN to pediatrics to all those rotations. So total it was 4 years of training as a medical student, and then you get your license to. Actually, if you finish your training, you will be licensed to practice only in the home country where you train. Like I'm licensed to practice in Guyana, but for me to practice in the US or UK, I need to write their licensing exam.
Yes. So that brings us to your life in the US now, because this is where you live now. So we're going to dwell more on this. So you came to the US, and I believe your goal is to still practice medicine. So you decided to embark on the USMLE journey. And where are you at this point of this transferring to US? What have you done so far?
Okay, so for me, I've finished all the licensing exam process. So for US medical licensing exam, just like I think someone have featured in your channel before.
I still want you to break it down for me, please.
Okay, sure, sure,
I
no
want you
problem.
to break it down. Yes.
Okay, sure. It's a four exam licensing process. Um, since after COVID, it's I would just say it's kind of three and a half.
Mhm.
But let me just break it down a little bit. So they have the step one, there's this step two clinical knowledge. Before COVID, they have the step two clinical skills, and then they have the step three, which is the final part of the US medical licensing process. So let me just break it down and explain all the steps and what you need to do or what you need to know for each of the exam. And if time permits, I might just talk a little bit about resources you might use to prepare for the exam. So for the step one, they test basically about your basic medical science knowledge, ranging from anatomy to physiology to biochemistry to pharmacology, pathology, biostatistics, ethics. Basically everything you covered in your medical school before your clinical rotation. So for this, you should have completed your first 2 years of medical school before you register for this part of the exam. Actually, there is no time frame for you to write this exam, but you need to have completed at least your 2 years of basic medical science in medical school. You can write it when you become a doctor, like practice for like 4, 5 years, 10 years in your home country. That doesn't it doesn't matter. But what matters is you need to have completed at least your 2 years of training of basic medical science, either in your home country or anywhere you trained. So the exam is an 8 hour exam. It's 7 blocks of 40 questions and it's 8 hours. And the exam average people prepare for it between for most people is between for Americans is between 6 weeks for most people that are foreigners because we are not acquainted with the system and the way the things are structured. It takes most foreigners between average of 4 to 6 months, sometimes more than that, sometimes lesser than that.
Yeah.
So for me the exam I wrote my exam immediately I graduated from medical school. I started with step one, so it's the one with the broadest coverage of courses. because you have to do, go back to the whole thing about anatomy. It's a whole lot of things. And for you to go on to the next part of the exam, you need to clear one. You can start with step two or step one, it doesn't matter. But for you to be able to move on to the next one, you need to clear at least one of the exam. But you cannot start with the step three. You can only start with step one or step two CK. So before COVID, it used to be if you clear either step one or step two CK, or even some people start with step two CS. Clear any of these, then you can always like choose any of the exams that you feel like you're comfortable with. But you need to clear the three of them before you get what's known as ECFMG license or ECFMG certification. ECFMG stands for ECFMG stands for the E is something I'm thinking about right now. I think that should be something certification for foreign medical graduates. I'll get the E and I'll post it. So, but it's just a body that gives out certification for all foreign medical graduates, even for American medical graduates that wants to practice here in the US. So okay, let me just talk about the whole exam then before I now get into how you get your license. So for step one, just like I mentioned, you go through the whole basic medical science. For step two CK, which is step two clinical knowledge, you need to have completed rotations in different sections of clinical science for medicine. When I mean clinical science, I mean the obstetrics and gynecology, the pediatrics, the psychiatry, the ophthalmology, surgery, and which other again? And you need to have completed all your clinical science basically before you'll be allowed to attempt the step two CK. CK stands for clinical knowledge of the US medical licensing process. So the exam is 9 hours and 9 hours of 8 blocks, 40 questions, a day exam, just one day exam. And that is for the step two CK. Then before COVID, they used to have what's known as step two CS. CS stands for clinical skills. So this is where you have to go to different, I think about 5 states in the US have centers where you can go and do test your clinical skills with doctors that act as patients, and you'll be assessed based on your clinical skills, how you take history, how you're able to come up with diagnosis, how you're able to communicate with the patient. They test your communication skills, your clinical knowledge, and how you're able to gather the information. So, but after COVID, because of the whole contacting, it was cancelled. So right now, there's an alternative to that, and that's known as the occupational English test. I guess that's what most nurses that want, or some healthcare professionals that want to come over here, they do. So OET is basically in place of the step two CS, or is an
Okay.
exam that is taking over, that's taking over from step two CS.
Okay, let me
So
pause you there a little bit. Let me ask a question. So, step one and step two can be done outside the US. You don't need to be in the US necessarily. But before, if you had to do CS, clinical skills, you had to be in the US to do step two. But now somebody can do step one and step two outside the US.
yeah, that's correct. So before COVID, you only need to do step one and step two CK outside the US. Then you apply for visa and come to the US to do your step two CS. But since COVID, since after post COVID, you can do the whole exam back in your home country apart from the step three.
Okay, so please go ahead. Step three.
Okay, so if after your OET exam, and they have some pathways like pathway 1 to 6 where you have to fit in before you get your full, they call it certification or ECFMG license. That license will actually give you a leverage, or will like give you will open the door for you to apply for medical residency So here in the US, there is no opportunity to practice without medical residency. For most doctors, you need to do residency before you're being regarded as a doctor here in the US. So if you get your ECFMG license, you can now apply for medical residency. So applications start around September. Interviews go from October up till January, February, then the result comes out in March. That's what we're waiting for right now. So it's an anxiety provoking process, really tough process, nerve wracking, but it's a process that takes a lot of determination and a lot of hard work, and you have to just be committed to it. So that's so
Okay,
then
so
for it's
let me get it
okay.
clear. So after step one and step two, you do this pathway before step three, or
Yeah. So the pathway is just a pathway whereby different doctors that were trained outside the US can fit into the ECFMG process. So if you have ECFMG mapped out about 5 or 6 pathways. Pathway one is for people I think that have practiced like about people that have already 1 year of practice in their home country. Pathway two is if your medical school is registered by some organization like some Canadian and US medical school fit into pathway two. Um, then there is pathway three. There are a couple of things involved in some of these pathway. But the thing is just you just have to know the pathway you fit into. For every medical doctor that graduated from a medical school that is recognized by WHO or WCME, that's the World Directory for Medical School, there is always a pathway where you have to fit into, right? So most people fit into pathway one, especially if you've practiced in your home country for at least a year.
what about somebody
So
fresh from medical school who has never worked before but has a
I
license?
think yeah, most of them will fit into pathway six. If your medical school is not registered by the Canadian body or US, I think Canadian, but there is a body like that, you might fit into pathway six. But the consensus is that you just will fit into a pathway for you to get your ECFMG license.
So which pathway did you
So
fit in? Did you work in Guyana
yeah,
after you did this?
I fit into pathway six.
Okay.
I fit into pathway six because I didn't practice in Guyana. I basically was a teacher. I was an instructor in the Caribbean after my medical school. So I fit into pathway six, and with that pathway six and my exams, I was able to register and get my ECFMG certification.
Okay. So now you take
Then
the examination in September and wait for the result in March the following year.
no, the exam can be taken anytime in the year, but
Okay.
the
Select.
application for residency start in September.
Okay. Okay.
Application for medical residency for all doctors that want to practice in the US starts in September. The deadline for application, I think, it's in around September 20, mostly between the last week of September. Then you have October, November, up till February for interviews. Like hospitals all over the US will start sending interview invite to different doctors, depending on your profile, your credentials, and what they see you like, whether you're fitted to that program. So right now, people are done with the interviews. People are waiting for the result because interviews end January, let's say till middle of February. All the interviews are done, and you start what's known as ranking. Like you rank the programs, and the program they rank you back. So if you guys match each other, that's why it's called a matching process. If you guys match each other, you then match into that program. So
Okay.
that's about it.
Yeah. The doctor I had before you, shout out Dr. Boapon. He applied to about 200 residency programs, and I think he heard back from 10, and only 4 proceeded, and everything narrowed down to 2 or 1 or so. It was very, very, it's a stressful process. So March is almost here, and we wish you all the best. We hope that you hear back from your choice. How many did you apply to, by the way, and How was that for you?
Yeah, I applied to 105 programs.
Wow.
I heard from technically I heard from five out of the I heard from five out of the 105 programs. So one of the things I just have to mention is if you're a foreign medical graduate and you're more than 5 years from medical school, it's might be difficult. You might get some interview, but it might be difficult for programs to do an interview because Americans favor recent medical grad. They favor people that just graduated from medical school. So the more you actually practice in your home country, the more red flags you are to them here in the US. So the consensus or the advice is start the process on time if you want to really come over here. I think the information is out there right now. People are actually more aware of the information about licensing process and what you need to do. So people have actually taken that into cognizance. So for me, I'm more than 5 years postgrad, so I expected to get less interview because already I'm red flagged to some programs. So I got about five interviews, and five interviews. I think two were in Texas, one in New York, one in Ohio, and one in Connecticut. So we've done with the interviews. Most of the interviews are still virtual. Some are still in person, but the one I did was virtual interviews. And yeah, right now we are doing what's known as ranking. We are ranking each other. They are ranking us, and we're ranking them back. So I just hope that by next month we'll get to know where we are going for next couple of years.
Wow, that's intense. So what happens if March comes and somebody's not selected? They gotta wait all the way to the next September to do it again?
Yeah, technically that's what it means, but there is something also known as SOAP. SOAP stands for, it's kind of like let me just try to explain it, but I've forgotten the full meaning, but it's just a process where if you didn't match, you can reapply to some programs where they have on-field position, on-field spots. Because during the ranking process, you let's say you're working in a hospital, you're a program director of a hospital, and you like me as a candidate, but I don't like your program as a candidate. I might not rank you so high, and you rank me so high. So if I don't match into your program, the spot will be on field, and this on field spot will present itself during SOAP. SOAP is just post match process where there are so many on-field spots, and you as a doctor, you have to apply to some of these programs that have an on-field spot, and technically some of them will call you for interviews. And what it favors majorly people that US people that have green card or people that have US citizen. For most IMGs, it's not really favorable for them in SOAP. But I've seen a couple of IMGs or people, foreign medical graduates, that still matched into SOAP. So if SOAP doesn't work for you, then that means you have to go through the whole process again by September next year.
Yeah. So most of our people who are watching these videos are outside the US. What kind of visa can they use to be doing all this process? Because obviously, as I said too, it looks like you have to be physically around to do most of these things. Or can you do everything whilst you're outside the US, and then the facilities, when they finally match you, they get a visa for you and sponsor you to come? What kind of visa process is involved in the USMLE for foreign medical graduate?
Yeah, that's a very nice question you asked there. Actually, that's the most difficult and the most non-academic part of this process. Mostly before COVID, people used to apply for B1, B2 visa, that's the tourist visa, to come and do their step 2 CS. And from there, they will now get some US clinical experience and rotations before they go back to their home country, or probably some of them stay back for interviews and go through the process and match. So the visa type that you get from outside the US to come here is either the B1 B2 visa or the F1, F2 visa, which is a student visa. Most doctors, especially from countries that have difficulty getting a visa, like people from home countries where visa is an issue, mostly go for F1, F2 because student visa is easier to get than B1, B2 visa. So the process for F1, F2 is that you're already here as a student, you go through the process here, and when you match, you go back to your home country and apply for employment visa. But B1, B2, you have to step out after every 6 months, which is not so palatable because every time you're stepping into the US, you have to give a reason or you have to tell them at the point of entry reason why you're coming back again. And sometimes it's not the best visa. So advice, if I'm to advise, I would say go for F1, F2. But the thing is, you have to pay for school fees and pay for the whole process. Which not every doctor have that kind of resource. So you can go for any of them, but you just have to know the pros and the cons involved in the process on the visa. And right now, step three is very essential, or will I say, is one of the things that will help you to get or to be ranked by program. I didn't talk about the step three probably because I had some conversation. I was having some conversation about the other step. Step three is the final step of the US medical licensing exam. Ideally, it's supposed to be taken during residency training. But because step one has become pass or fail, before 2020, they attach a score to all of this exam. Like you have a score. The higher your score, the better your chance of matching into a program. But I think before COVID, around that period, they changed step one to pass or fail, and they removed the step two CS. So right now, most IMG or foreign medical grads, especially people that have been practicing in their home country for more than 5 years, they prefer to do step three to increase their chance of being ranked by program and be matching into a program. Step three is just a combination of both step one, step two, and step three. Like every single thing you've learned from your medical school down to your practice, like down to the clinical knowledge. It's a 2-day exam, unlike the other one. And the first day is they test a lot about step one concept. Then the second day is basically about step two. Then they have step three concept. So the exam is it's 8 and 9 hour exam. The first day is 8 hours, the second day is 9 hours exam. And for that, you have to be in the US for you to write the exam. You can't write it from outside the US. So you need to get your visa and be in the US to write the step three. That's the final part of the exam. And to me, people say it's the most difficult, reasonably because it's more like it's 2-day exam and it's more challenging. But I think it all depends. It's relative. I can't really say it's the most difficult for me. So that's just about it. If you pass your step three exam, technically to increase your chance of being matched into a program, especially if you're more than 5 years from medical school. So
Okay.
most foreign medical graduates would like or
Okay.
would like to take the exam, yeah, before they apply for match.
Okay. But you cannot, it's not a requirement to take the exams before the match. You can apply even if you have not taken the third exams, step three.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
So is it a requirement? You have to have step one, step two, step three before you can match for residency.
Step three is not a requirement, but step one and step two is required for
Yeah.
foreign medical grad. But to increase your chance to match, especially if you're more than 5 years and you are not a US medical student, it's advisable to do step three.
Okay. And all these exams from step one, step two, step three, you can only write it in the US.
Step one and step two outside the US, step three is in the US.
Okay, so is it an in-person, you go to an examination center, or you write it, or how is it set up like step one, two, and three?
So you have to apply to Prometric Center. It's called Prometric Center. I think um, most countries have their Prometric Center, but where I trained, there is no Prometric Center. I have to fly to Trinidad is the closest center to where I train. I have a Prometric Center. So I think for most Nigerians, they have to go to Ghana. Ghana has a center in West Africa. Most people in the Caribbean is either Trinidad or they come over here in the US to write the exam. So you apply to the Prometric Center, you get a date, then you prepare yourself ahead of the exam, like ahead of the exam day. You make sure you're there at least a day before, and you prepare also yourself because it's an 8 hour, 9 hour exam. So you have to be mentally ready and be physically ready because it's gonna be mentally draining and it's gonna be really challenging mentally for you to do the exam without a good sleep or probably without a good food or something.
So do you have to exhaust all the 8 hours? Is it a computer-based examination, and do people finish earlier than 8 hours, or you have to sit there till the entire 8 hours is done?
To be honest, I don't think if you actually know what you're doing, or if you really um if you want to really do well in the exam, you you just step out like 6 or 7 hours before the exam. Like most people exhaust the 8 hours, or let's say like few minutes to the 8 hours. Because the exam is like, I don't know how to explain it. It's a whole lot of just one question is a whole lot of lines, about 10 line questions with so many options, about sometimes 8, 9 options. So you don't have the time to even finish a block like that early. Sometimes you see time like working against you. So it's really challenging for people to even time is always a factor. Sometimes it's not even about the knowledge, it's about the timing. So most people actually finish either like few minutes before the 8 hours or at the dot. For me, all the exams I finish them just at the dot of the hours, or
Yeah,
sometimes a factor for me. It all depends on how the skill you apply during the exam to navigate through the timing, because time is going to really choke you.
and
Time is
this is a CAT, computer-based examination. You write it using a computer. Okay. Okay. And you said Ghana has a center. I'll look it up and I'll put the details on there for anybody who is interested in Africa who wants to go, or West Africa who wants to write. And I'm sure South Africa will also have a center because that's where our nurses go to write for those in South Africa. I don't know about East Africa, but I'll look up all the centers. It's called Prometric Center.
Yeah, Prometric Center. Prometric Center is the center for the US medical licensing exam. But for ASCPI, I didn't even talk about that.
We are
Yes,
going to talk about ASCPI for my fellow lab techs because they needed more questions, and unfortunately, my source Hilary is no more with us. So we'll come to the lab tech questions as well. So now you are just in the phase
yeah,
waiting to hear in March whether you match for residency, and we'll keep you in our prayers. And then when you match, we'll have you back on the channel to tell us what you matched into. But my question, I think hopefully the last medical question, is that for somebody who finished medical school, worked for some years, and then went to specialize. You became a maybe OBGYN or radiologist or a pediatrician or something, and you want to do this USMLE process. If you're matching for residency, do you do it as a general practitioner, or do you do it for this field that you have your specialty in? If you get my question.
yeah, I get your question. So most people actually, for most doctors that have practiced probably in their home countries, or most doctors that have experience in their home country, they prefer to stick to specialties where they've either done residency or where probably they've been practicing for a while. It actually increases your experience and it widens your knowledge and also helps you during the match process. Let me just give a typical example. If you're a pediatrician, just like you mentioned in your home country, and you're applying to pediatrics here in the US, your chance automatically increases. getting into programs, especially if you don't have much red flags in your application. So it's always advised, if you want to go through the process, especially after medical school, try to do either research work or do training within the field where you intend to match or where you intend to apply during your residency. For me, my interest has always been pathology and internal medicine. So I was a teacher, I was an instructor in pathology back in Caribbean, within pathology field. Most doctors also they work within the field where they intend to apply to. But there is a clause to that. Actually, if you want to apply to, there is some specialties in the US here that are considered very competitive specialty. It's competitive for both Americans. Then for we IMGs, these chances are less than 2%, like less than 1%. Specialties like dermatology, some surgical specialties, ophthalmology, these are very competitive specialty for Americans. Like I mean, medical students that are trained here in the US. So if you're doing such a specialty back in your home country and you want to apply for the same specialty here in the US, you have to really consider a lot of things. How much year you intend to put into the whole process and how you intend to navigate through. But most times, one thing I've seen as a as a norm for most doctors that have such experiences that they want to get their foot into the system first, then they can easily navigate. Like you see doctors that are ophthalmologists back in their home countries, they come here, they might start with something like family medicine, they do family medicine residency, then after family medicine, they if they still have the interest of going back to become an ophthalmologist, then there is a more safer pathway for them and the more easier pathway for them to be able to switch. So that's just about the whole system.
Okay. You did mention that somebody who has spent over 5 years after medical school stands a lesser chance, so to say. So, if they're counting the 5 years for a specialist like a pediatrician, are they counting 5 years post medical school, or are they going to restart counting 5 years post your specialty?
Yeah, very nice question, and that's there's always a debate, and this is one gray area for most most program directors. So most program directors consider 5 years post medical school, but the fact that you've done your residency or you're doing currently doing residency in your home country in that particular field, you are actually given a grace, or let me say that might not totally apply to you. So you have like a saving grace, or you have like that would be kind of like
An upper hand, yeah.
yeah, you have an upper hand. It's just like a nurse that applied to medical school and become a doctor, and probably during your nursing training you did something like anesthesia and you come back to medical school, you want to be an anesthesiologist. It's not going to be the same with someone, so there will be a lot of flexibility they will give to you. Yeah, so that's just about it. So they might not you might not get a good number of interviews because during the interview season there is something they call filter, like put up your year of graduation, and they filter a lot of candidates based on their year of graduation. But if you actually address some of these things during in your personal statement and you write what's known as letter of interest to programs, they might pick up your your credentials, or they might pick up your application and specifically call you for interview because of that. Like you don't just apply randomly and just leave them to figure it out, because there are a lot of people applying to programs. There are thousands of doctors. Some programs get up to 10,000, some 15,000 application. So you don't expect them to start like picking up who is an attending in their home country or who is not. But if you write these letters, send it like a code email to them, they can now say, okay, this is a very good candidate. He has trained in his own country. So they will look at your application, they will look at it holistically, then some of them will call you for interview based on that.
Wow. Okay. So we wish you all the best in March. Now let's circle back to your first love, quote in quotes, lab scientist or lab technician. I don't know. I use the words wrongly sometimes. You are a lab scientist, correct?